Hello and welcome to Coffee Talk with Serge, the interview series. Take a load off from your busy workday and listen to the dulcet tunes of our guests, who are all over the cybersecurity landscape. We're going to ask them some hard questions, not going to lie, probably some softballs too. But no matter what, it's going to be a good time. So sit back, pour yourself a nice hot cup of coffee, or something stronger if it's that time of day, and enjoy Coffee Talk with Serge. And yes, Alex, I did make that introduction. I know you.
No, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. I was thinking about making a joke about it, but no, I have no notes. It's pretty good.
Impossible. It's impossible to make a joke about perfection. That's why no one ever says anything weird about me. It's just.
It's so good, man. I didn't know. You could have been like a radio person in a different life, a
I've
calmer life,
often been
less
told that I have
stressful.
a face for radio, as they say. So there we go. Welcome, Mr. Alex Pinto. A storied career in cybersecurity, but most recently at the VZ DBIR, which we're going to be going into here over at Verizon. Welcome to everyone joining us. As always, we're happy to take any questions. We'll be throwing them in. We see them coming in. But today we're here to talk 30, 45 minutes. We'll see where the spirit takes us around the most recent DBIR release, 2023. Go over the high points, go over the low points. I think we know what we're talking about, HAK. Kind of talk about the differences over the last year and then how you're seeing people using it. I saw some interesting new inclusions around CIS and MITRE ATT&CK kind of elaborating, which is a new one. As a long-time friend and reader of the DBIR, it was fun to see the changes. So welcome, Alex. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Right? It's not often I get interviewed by a radio celebrity. So
Indeed.
It's a pleasure.
So I guess my biggest question, so last couple of years, I've been doing a bit of a live thread. This year I was on vacation, and this year I really screwed up the threading part. I blame Elon. But, I kind of go through step by step and kind of call out the things I understand, the things I'm interested in. And I was really thinking about last year and thinking about the 2022 version of the DBIR. And I wasn't shocked by a lot of the data changes, at least. I think I have more comments and more questions around some of the format and your new data analysis and kind of methodologies there, especially around visualizations. But I was not seeing anything drastically different around the data, or at least not a lot of huge surprises. What are your thoughts? Am I missing something? Was there something you were surprised by?
I guess. So everything that has been happening over the past few years, we have been kind of, it has been sussing out a trend, right? And it's a trend we talk about every single report, right? Because this is really where we're seeing all those things going, which is basically going for simple. So what is the simplest monetization technique that I can have, right? To be the most possible, the most efficient in making sure I got a breach and I can get some money out of it. So we saw that, and we started that discussion with ransomware for the last couple of years, right? And we started seeing it's only been, I mean, it's been around in our data set until I'm going to say 17, which means we started seeing it in 16, right? And but it really started growing over 2020, 2021, 2022. 2022, we had that huge headline, which was it doubled what it was the 5 years previous, right? And we saw this huge spike. And what we saw then and what we see now is really what is the simplest way. So we saw ransomware. Ransomware was something that actually remained stable for this year, which was, I'm not gonna say it was surprising, right? We don't really have a kind of a batting ring on the DBIR team, but we were like, we wouldn't be surprised if it had continued to grow, maybe less sharply than before, right? Its stabilizing was interesting for us because we did ask the question, okay, when is it going to stop, right? There's going to be a point where there are no more hills to climb, as in we got into critical mass of financial motivated crimes and things like that. So right now, I just wanted to, for folks who haven't quite looked at the report yet, right, we're looking at 24% of all breaches that we analyzed on the DBIR, and we didn't even tell folks what the DBIR is. It's fine, right? These folks know what the DBIR is.
Well, just in
All right.
case, just in case. I mean, Mick Baccio might be watching. Need to break it down for him.
Of course. So let me take a step back before we really dive into it. So the Data Breach Investigations Report, the DBIR, is a report that Verizon puts together year over year, analyzing the kind of the data breach landscape around the world, right? And I know those reports today are kind of a dime a dozen, but there's two things that make the DBIR different and I dare say respected in the industry. First of all, we have been doing this for 16 years, right? So there's a lot of very clear methodology, and we can draw some very clear trends over time, right? And in a vocabulary that's consistent, right? We have a standard that we follow that's called VERIS, right? So you can the words, we have a lot of proper nouns on the report. So when we say ransomware, there is a definition, right? You can go and look at the stand, okay, this is the type of attack they're describing, and we try to be as precise as possible. That's thing number one. The second thing is that it's not just Verizon's data, right? Of course, there's one of the very strong contributor that we have is Verizon Incident Response Services themselves, right? There's a whole cybersecurity consulting branch. But we get data from everyone, right? We have data over 81 countries this last year, right? So all over the world, IR companies, right? Even if they're competitors, right? They will provide us anonymized data, right? We have ISACs, we have law enforcement all around the world. So it's interesting. It is an interesting analysis because we're rigorous, right? A lot of rigor in statistics, making sure that we're not making any outlandish claims, right? Oh yeah, it's really big, it's growing. Yeah, just buy that stock or something, right? No, it's very rooted in statistics, very rooted in the data that we have, right? And also again the pervasiveness of the data. So we were talking about things that were different, things that were notable, right? And we started going into ransomware because, of course, it's a favorite, right? It doesn't go anywhere. We make a lot of jokes on the report about us being held ransom. We cannot stop writing about it.
Let's be honest. You talked about why the report is well respected. It's actually the academic footnotes.
Of course, those are very important. Those very, very, very well researched. So ransomware remains stable from last year, but the number is enormous, right? We're talking about 24% of all breaches that we analyzed, and we analyzed over 5,200 had a ransomware component in it, right? If you look at it in a different way, this also means that 62% of all the attacks we have in our data set where we identified it came from some sort of organized crime entity, right? So in the loosely organized organizations that are trying to steal money and monetize breaches. So 62% was ransomware from organized crime. And 59% of all incidents that we found that had a financial motivation, right, were also ransomware. So could it get to 100? No, because we have other stuff going on. We have pretexting, which was also a huge finding, right? So those numbers are already pretty high. Maybe we can inch a little more there. Maybe they can claw a little more of that percentage, but we might be seeing getting closer to quote unquote peak ransomware, right? Again, let's look about that again. 1 in every 4 breaches. Right? It's staggering.
And this is a key point, right? You say the word breaches, which has a meaning for you. You also talk in the report about incidents, which is something I really love because not every incident results in a breach, but every breach results from an incident. The other part here, this is a good time, Alex and I met through the SANS CTI community, one of several places actually. We're both threat intel nerds in the, on our back of our shirts. And one of the things we talk about a lot is bias. And so for the Verizon DBIR, we're talking like 24%, 1 in every 4 incident is ransomware. But when you're looking at the bias of the data, that's inherently going to skew some of those observations, right? For those of you who don't know, at the bottom of the report, it goes through all the organizations that Alex kind of went through that volunteer data in. And then obviously the incident response team at Verizon has the majority of the data from what you said. So, it's going to be interesting to me as time goes on. Like, I think the data you have is representative of the community, just anecdotally from what I've seen and when I talk to people and what I've read in Splunk's own state of security report. But it is dominate, it's kind of like, oh, murders are the #1 problem in every American city. And then you look at it, it's like, oh, actually, murder's actually gone down. Significant crime has gone down consistently since 1992. But it's still the #1 media report. I think we're having the same occurrence here just because of the victims and also the move it right now with the insane payouts they're asking for.
Yeah. So I have two things to say about that, right? So one of the big bias, the most fundamental bias that we have in the data that we analyze is a discovery bias, in the sense that we cannot report on a breach that was never found out, right? And that doesn't mean made public. That means, oh, somebody figured something out and called an instant responder, and the instant responder did their thing, wrote it down, we got an anonymized copy of it. Ransomware are overly represented in being found out. It's very hard to be a covert ransomware operator.
If you're a covert ransomware operator, you're broke.
Correct.
Right? Like it's inherently you want to get caught. Otherwise, you're not going to get paid.
Exactly.
When will they notice that I encrypted their files? Oh, they're playing coy. No, it doesn't work like that.
Right. Exactly. So in the realm of breaches that see the light of day, so to speak, ransomware obviously is a contender, right? So that could help push its numbers than it probably is on the general population of known knowns, unknown unknowns, and all those quadrants that you have over there.
Yep.
However, there's one anecdote that I like to talk about, which has to do with healthcare, right? So before the days of and I don't remember who was the first one who did it. You probably know the first ransomware operator that, in addition to encrypting the data, also exfiltrated it and threatened to.
Oh yeah, the extortion.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. We don't need to give an advertisement to them. But when that started, right? So before that started, it was very much. Sorry, my computer decided to go to sleep while I was talking to you. So funny. So while that's
how good my radio voice is. I can even put computers
the dulcet tones. Yeah.
Dulcet
tones. Where was I? So before those days, right? We would look at healthcare, the healthcare vertical, right? And we have, again, we are data nerds. We have a very specific definition of what healthcare is. It goes by the NAICS standard, right? It's all covered in the first few pages of the report. I'm not going to go into that, but there's something we call the healthcare version, and it's vast majority of those folks are regulated by HIPAA, right? So HIPAA, from the beginning of ransomware happening, they put their foot down and said, no, we consider this a breach. So this is something that has to be notified, right? And it has to be disclosed. So before the extortionators, the percentage of ransomware in our data set was way higher in healthcare than it was everybody else, right? And we're like, okay, I can see what's happening here. You see some suppressed demand, right? People are not reporting what's going on. Now the number is even, right? So whatever the rules of figuring out the ransomware exists or not, it's now across the board, right? Extortion, and of course, more visibility and understanding of what ransomware is, right? So this is.
We saw an interesting occurrence with the report that Splunk sponsored, where we looked at different countries within Europe, and we saw a lot more out of Germany than per se France. And it's not that I think German network defenders are better, or that French network defenders are worse, or that Germany is getting targeted more than France. What we, anecdotally think is it's a causality of regulatory requirements, especially as NIST 2 starts rolling out and various things there. It's the adherence to reports gives more visibility to these incidents, which, then on paper, you're like, oh my God, this, it's the same thing where if you look at any of the reports and like, oh, North America gets so many more hacking attempts than Southeast Asia. It's like, well, no, we might report it more, we might detect it more, but that's not necessarily means we're getting attacked more.
It's funny because we did saw a slight uptick on, so we have the information vertical, which is where your run-of-the-mill internet companies would live, right? Your proverbial internet startup, your proverbial social media, right? We already had a high number of personal data being the data that was exfiltrated. It inched up when we got to the California regulation in, because most of these folks are based out of California. They can't wiggle out of it, right? We saw a little bit of an uptick there as well, right? Of course, these folks usually have more information than is sane to have, right, in order to do their business. But it's interesting. We always see these kinds of impacts. Usually takes a year or two to propagate, but it has a lot of what to say, right? Usually, about the bias question, right? Usually, what we say, right, which is, I mean, the honest truth is that we really believe this is the best we can do. But I don't mean we, Verizon. I mean we, right? As an organization, right? We can only talk about the things that were discussed, right? And I think this is the best data set that has been assembled so far, right? And we're always trying to improve it. Right?
I had a question when I mentioned I was interviewing you from someone who works in state and local education. And, I went through the data sources below and I didn't see a lot of federal or state and local. Do you have representation from there within the Verizon, world? Is that, a public sector sort of representation?
You mean specifically state and local government or healthcare state? I'm not sure I quite understand which of the types of providers you're talking about.
Well, just more like non-commercial, I guess. Is the secretary or the State Department providing information? Is the Bureau of Indian Affairs?
We have a lot. We get a lot from federal, right? And a lot of the state and local filters in through the incident responders, filters in through ISACs and things like that, right? But it also shows up a little bit on the federal data, right? Sometimes they have to report as well, especially if it is. No, that's not true, right? Only on federal level, right? But I know we have. It's fairly good. I can't tell you the numbers off the top of my head.
Sure.
We
But it's
have been
represented.
tracking.
Yeah.
Yes, of
Great.
course.
One of the things I thought was interesting, and I was curious before I read it, how you were going to deal with it, is obviously the Log4Shell, Log4j explosion, right? And you had some really great facts in there around just the amount of something I've been hearing questions from around just like, was it actually that big of a deal versus the actual impact? And, my gut feeling was like, it was a huge deal. Did you see all that scanning? And then I started talking to people. I was like, actually, did anyone... I've heard more compromises in the last 6 months for Log4j than I did during Log4Shell, because it's internal pivoting where people are finding the systems that they never got patched rather than the external side.
Yeah, that is interesting. That is truly interesting. But yeah, we definitely went through a roller coaster analyzing the data this year, right? Especially because it's what you said. We were expecting a bump on what we call exploitation of vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Right. One of the things that we track is how did folks get in? Has been for the past few years credentials and then phishing and then exploitation of vulnerability. I'm like, oh, we're gonna see exploitation of vulnerability grow. Maybe it won't overtake phishing, but hey, Log4j was a big deal, right? And it wasn't. It didn't grow. So hold on. Are we missing this data?
Right.
Are we not seeing this? So we saw Log4j overly represented on two disparate data sets, which told us, yes, it actually was significant. So first of all, on the instant data side, right, which is like I mentioned, the data that comes from the instant responders. So again, varying degrees of data quality. One of the big lifts that we do on the report and making sure that this is all made smooth. And for everyone else, it was one data set, right? How hard can it be to
Right.
put this report together? So there's differing data quality issues, right? Some of the folks, they provide us, it was this vulnerability. So all the data that we had on exploitation of vulnerabilities, 20% of it had a comment. It was this vulnerability. So first buy, 20%. Okay. Of this 20%, 90% was log4shell.
Wow.
It either had log4j as a comment or had
Right.
the CVE number. So it was top of mind. Right? We cannot extrapolate the 20% to the whole without potentially saying something wrong. We don't really know. Maybe we were maybe people only knew a log4j. They don't know any other vulnerability at the time, right? That's an unlikely explanation, but it's a possible explanation, right? But we see, okay, overly represented here. What about internet scanning data sets? We went to our internet scanning partners and we came out with that number. There, a third of the scanning that year happened on the first 30 days. So if you remember that age-old statistic. We didn't cover it this year, but every other year, we used to put what is the median time for patching based on our vulnerability management partners. It's never been better than 45, 50 days. Never. That's the median, even on vulnerabilities which are critical. So by all accounts, should have been a disaster.
Yeah.
If it takes folks 45 to 50 days to patch, and the first 30 days we had a third of the scanning. All right, let's go home. Computers are no more. Got to learn an actual trade now. But no, it didn't happen because everybody made such a big deal I don't mean such a big deal as it was something bad. It was the right thing to do. Everybody and again, this is data we don't have, but anecdotally, I was sitting on those tables as well.
Yeah.
We had statements from our vendors in a couple of days. Patching.
I mean, we were as Splunk, we were a supplier of software, obviously, and a consumer. So I was kind of in the middle of both of those conversations of things like working with the JCDC for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security about how are you going to patch our constituents and our customers, while also working with our internal teams of like, how are we going to get patches from everyone? I've never seen anything like it. But to your point, it's kind of was it just a giant dress rehearsal for something that ended up not being as bad as it could have been? It's time will tell. It's
but this is why I make the Y2K joke on the report, because it's just Y2K.
Yep. And you can't prove a negative. If everyone hadn't busted their butt for a year or two before, it could have been calamitous.
And then people were overreacting. Maybe they weren't. We'll never know. The alternate universe where that happened, everybody's just like,
I think you had one slide again, or one stat that was like 22% of every organization had at least one or more vulnerable log4j binaries, which was just a stunning number, which showed the breadth. Moving sadly on from log4j, one of the things I really enjoyed this year was the classification, the incident classification patterns. For those of you who've never worked with me or haven't seen, I'm a huge visualization nerd, and one of the things I love most about the Verizon DBIR is the attempts, sometimes successful, sometimes not, of showing multivariate data, which is very difficult. For those of you who don't know, I hate pie charts. I think they should be only used for pies, how much I've eaten or not. There's a lot of effort that goes into trying to explain why you should make a visualization anything more than a bar chart or a column chart or a table, right? And that's where we use the words like multivariate, meaning we're going to hit multiple points of data in a single visualization for better consumption and context, is how I think of it. I do believe the Verizon DBIR is the most adventurous and has the best of any of the information security. I don't always agree, but I do enjoy the different attempts. And one of them this year that I think gives a good method for those of you who are following along at home who isn't, with their take-home printed Verizon DBIR report, is around pattern of times in incidents and then pattern of times in breaches. And we kind of talked about this previously, is there is a difference between incidents and breaches. And one of the things that's called out in the report is, in 2022 to 23, denial of service kind of went up. And that was in the incidents, right? So people recognizing like, hey, we're getting denial of service attacked, but that doesn't usually result in a breach. Like most denial of services are not intended to result in a breach or designed to cause an availability issue, as I believe Microsoft is, just admitted yesterday or something like that around their own systems with KillNet, where the breaches, you see system intrusion going strong, from 2021 to 22 to 23, basic web application attacks kind of going through. So I was curious, do you see, are there any threads that you guys pulled a little bit around these two correlations of, denial of service being different? The second one, of course, was basic web attacks, or system intrusion for 2022-23, and then how that might tie to the breaches as well. Anything there that you kind of saw that didn't make the report or that you want to reemphasize?
No, I think you very much hit the nail on the head when you were talking about the denial of service, right? Obviously, being a telco, we're also overly represented on visibility of those threats, and again, they don't end up being breaches, right? Vast majority of them, I'd say the really vast majority of them are only availability compromises and not confidentiality, which would be the kind of the main component for a breach. If you were to take denial of service out, right, the two charts, they become fairly similar. I don't have the instant chart in front of me, so
You don't have your bound copy signed by the team?
they actually take some time to print them, right? And we try. So we believe the incident patterns are very important to look at the incident classification. So this is patterns over time, right? This is breaches. What about the top one? There we go. So which one? System intrusion and loss of stolen assets gets a lot of play in.
I was interested by that. There's a section down below where you talk more about this. Sorry if I'm making anyone nauseous here. I apologize. Denial of service. I found this one fascinating because it actually went up in 2020 for theft. And my assumption would have been that would have gone down just because people weren't leaving their house as much in 2020. Obviously.
Remember, it's a year removed.
It's a year removed, right? Okay, so 2020 was reporting from 2019, and 2021 was, okay. That makes more sense. That aligns with what I would have thought. So,
this is loss of stolen assets is interesting because it's also a little bit skewed to public sector. They have very strict mandates.
Yep.
Yes, and we see them a lot.
I saw this when I lived in the UK and worked for a British company, and because the ICO had very strong regulatory punishments for reporting of lost assets and breaches, you definitely would see that oversampled if you had a global, because I worked for a global company, and it's like you looked at all the different subsidiaries, you'd see anyone that was out of Britain would be like 2x higher on lost assets because they had a financial. They had to, and if they didn't, they got hit 2x, 3x harder, or just there's a larger amount of education around it. It's an interesting. It's always funny to me how regulatory people who don't like regulatory compliance don't see the impact, right?
We keep getting back to regulation, right?
Yeah, it's there. One thing I pulled out of it. Sorry, go ahead, Alex, please.
I'm just going to add the patterns again. Is us trying to solve the problem you're describing. Each incident or breach, we have 4 main variables that we're tracking. We're tracking the actor, which is pretty much who did it, the action, which is pretty much the how, the asset, which is the what, and the attribute, which is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which is pretty much what was messed up. Then what? And you can't plot those four together. So there's a lot of math, actual math behind those patterns. There's a lot of unsupervised machine learning, very, very fine-tuned k-means work. I'm probably underrepresented. There's a whole, I think in the 2021 one, there's like a whole chapter about what was the process for creating those. But it can create a shorthand, right? Is the system intrusion and basic application attacks is where most of the hacking and malware live. Actually, this application attacks is a lot of hacking, but very little malware, because the main difference between those two is the basic web application attacks. They stop at the web application, so they're shorter. They didn't mean to compromise infrastructure. Whatever the data that they wanted was there at the web. I'm not going to say web page, but the web facing asset. So APIs and Office 365 and all those different things, all those types of compromises, they live there on basic web application attacks.
Well, that's actually a great segue, right? So this is one of the multivariate visualizations that I found interesting. And the context here, for people who haven't read the report, is around basically the system intrusion. So how people got into the systems. And when you kind of go through it, not necessarily it's the how did they get in, what ingress, right? In this case, email. And then the second, what did they actually send, was Office documents, which I thought was an interesting one, because later on you talk about pretexting and phishing, which are tightly related, but they're not the same. But here you can conflate the two into just email as the ingress delivery, if I'm reading this correctly, right? So I'm curious, the background there, for those of you who don't know what pretexting is, can you explain just quickly what the difference between phishing and pretexting is, like how they can be conflated, but they're actually separate?
Yeah, so there's actually a third I want to add there, just to make sure we're tracking all the different cases, because you were talking about the malware delivery vector there, and that's actually, we measure that in distinction from phishing. So phishing it usually has overloaded a lot in our heads, as in anything bad that comes over email, and it could have been something you can execute. It could have been they telling you to do something. Could have been telling you to go to a website and enter information. So that's how we split those up. So pretexting, and to be clear, both pretexting and phishing in our they doesn't matter the media, right? It could be a phone call, could be someone sending you an SMS. So it's all inclusive there. We just don't want to use all the weird words that people keep using. There's no need for that. And
So
so
you don't want to do
pretexting is
smushing and vishing
no,
and
I hate all of those, like with a passion. So next thing I know, you're gonna try to make threatening happen, right? Which
that's
we have
mixed
all
word,
agreed.
threatening. Hashtag threatening.
Yeah,
David Bianco loves it.
I know. Anyway, we do give him a pass because of the pyramid, but he's kind of pushing it there, I think. So pretexting is when they tell you, hey, do something for me. Hi, I am your CEO. I need you to buy me, for some reason, I need you to go to the grocery store and buy me an Apple gift card, right? So this is what pretexting usually entails. There's no, a way to think about it, there's no real follow. I mean, of course, there could be follow up in the computer world, but it's not immediate. You're just trying to change the behavior of a person at the end of the day, and have them do something they wouldn't do. The phishing part, it does that as well, but with the clear objective of making them give out their credentials. So when we say phishing, we are very narrowly looking at the credentials part.
Gotcha.
When someone sends you an email with malware, it ends up, depending on the nature of and again, that's when it gets a little bit confusing, depends on the level of detail of the incident we review. Sometimes there is also a kind of a phishing component. They try to do both things, but clicking on the malware that came via email, it is a malware action for us where the vector was email. Right? So to make it fairly clear, because the outcome matters. the outcome matters. How those things chain together, they matter for our kind of an analysis purposes, right? So it does come across as a bit pedantic, but that's literally the work that we try to do to organize this information to make sure that it's meaningful at the end of the day. So one of the findings we had this year was that pretexting has really grown over the past year. So it's become. I'm not saying phishing has fallen out of vogue. It's still very high. So 44% of social engineering pattern attacks we have to do with phishing, but 50% now have pretexting. So you can see, doesn't mean they can't happen together with each other, right? Our charts, they don't need to add to 100% because more than one thing can happen, right? But you're seeing this being overly represented. And again, goes back to the narrative we were talking about in the beginning of this conversation, where pretexting it's very low cost.
Yep.
And I'm not telling you it's super effective, but it's effective enough in relation to the cost of just sending an email.
Penny to email, it's not a bad way to go, right? Compared to buying a $1 million Ode and still having to get that in the front door. So
correct.
And when we look across the as you said, a lot of this is around getting creds one way or the other.
Correct.
Where for web application attacks, that's one of the areas that comes up over and over again. It's not that they're, it's either using legitimate credentials to log in, or it was finding a vulnerability that was unpatched, right? Those were the two consistent, even more so. I was expecting to see misconfiguration come up more.
No,
but it was really unpatched and password, which I did have a question. You call out GAFFE, GAFFE, which I had to make sure was not that I was using the word correctly. I believe that was in the misconfiguration here. Let's see. It was low, I admit. That leaning fellow here, and you have a nice little footnote, I think, somewhere on it. GAFFE is always near the bottom, considering how many of those we make ourselves. So once again, who says you can't have humor within cybersecurity? That's the fun report there. We had a couple questions come in, which I'd love to give a chance here. From Garen, would it be possible to elaborate on who analyzes this type of data and how they go about their analysis? I know you've talked a little bit about that, but around the analysis of the data, but maybe going into kind of who makes up this incredible team.
It's
just you, and it's like everything at Surge.
Who analyzes the data? It's me. No, it's not. So we have there's a team dedicated in Verizon to security research, and this is like Verizon Business, right? Just to be clear, there's 1,000 different Verizons, especially. It's a very big company, and we're connected to the cybersecurity consulting team, right? So again, whole cybersecurity consulting practice, right? I mean, anyway, they do a lot of stuff. I do research, and this is a team of 5 people, actually 4. It's a team of 4 people, and we, among other things, we put together the report. The report takes the vast majority of our time. We're talking about usually half of the year. We're either collecting data or we are making sure it's clean, it's formatted on the various framework, as I mentioned before, then analyzing, writing the report, going through 1,000 review cycles, and also overall production. So, I mean, I'm sure you have been involved in some measure with the Splunk report, so you know how marketing agencies and infographics and all the marketing copy, and we just go cross-eyed by the end of the process, because we literally reviewed like maybe 1,000 pages worth of content, even though the report was only 85, but to make sure that everything was relatively
well, any of these big reports, it's it's like when I wrote my master's thesis, and at the end of it, you're so sick of it, and you're like, this is the dumbest thing that's ever been created. It's completely worthless. No one's going to want to read it, and more importantly, I never want to talk about it again. And then 3 weeks later, someone's like, hey, Alex, can you come on Coffee Talk? Love to talk about it with you.
No, this is the launch tour. The launch tour
This
is
is the
fine.
fun part.
The
Yeah,
launch
this is
tour
the
is fine.
accolades. Throw your roses.
Yeah,
Um,
but it is. I mean, I've never written a book, an actual book, but I
we're no
know
Scott Roberts. We're no Rebecca Brown.
yes, correct. But I mean, we do write a short one every year,
Yeah.
and it is exhausting, but it is anyway very very rewarding. So
What's the background of the people on the team? Are they all data scientists? Are they former security analysts?
So there's a mix. There are data scientists. I lean more data science as well, even though I have a background in consulting on detection engineering and security operations centers, right?
Entrepreneurship, startups.
Blah blah blah. The we have folks with forensic backgrounds on the team as well. So folks who have done the actual work and also very helpful in making sure that, oh, this looks right, this doesn't look right. And of course, the team keeps up with whatever's going on in the world. We have to keep, and honestly, everything that happens on the news become research bullet points for us, right? So we
Yeah.
hear about MOVEit, and so okay, we definitely have to look for patterns that look like the MOVEit attack to understand if this is a trend that has been growing, if it's something that. So that's kind of like how we source a lot of the things we're looking for on the data. Some of them pan out, some of them don't pan out. Usually, when you say something on the report like, "Oh yeah, we were looking for this and that, but we didn't quite find it. It might be biased, it might be not, because we had a specific line item we were researching, right? But we couldn't really find the the kind of the data there. But if you're interested in understanding a little bit more about the type of data, right? The best thing is to try to have a look at the Veris standard. So if you go to verisframework.org, it's a website we are revamping, by the way. It still looks like to be in the early aughts, that website.
I love the Drupal look. I mean, it's a step
It's
up from the
it's
original
it's
GeoCities and Angelfire, and I
You're
for one
almost
stand.
there. We're
Yeah,
almost there. We should. I think I should add a few blinks there just to
yeah, a
see.
little construction man,
Yeah, construction man. We're getting there. We're
construction
getting there.
person. No need unnecessarily gendered.
That's fair. That's fair. That's true. But that's the best way for you to try to understand the data. Throughout the report, we exemplify as much as we can. We explain as much as we can. Right. I made sure to add sidebars on each of the main topics, the actors and actions. So like, okay, these are the top ones you need to know about, just to make sure that people are understand kind of the vocabulary that we're using.
There's another question on appreciate the insight on denial service. I understand that's not, but are there other types of incidents that may be unexpectedly prone to evolve into a breach? And so when I look through this, kind of looking at your chart again here, obviously, as we said, denial of service very high, web application attacks, social engineering, lost and stolen assets, and then you go down to kind of correlating those across,
Yeah.
miscellaneous areas. Was there anything, if we kind of synthesize that, were there any specific tales that perhaps you might have thought like was interesting that didn't make that like, or that kind of stood out, like the everything else, like, oh, this happened because a crocodile ate a cable and yada yada yada. Suddenly the Russians are inside the network. Um, did you find any interesting anecdotes around like most interesting breach or anything like that that you could share? And if not, then completely understand because it looks like the user has reclassified. So,
No, I have a couple I like to
oh,
talk about. Not for this year. They're not from this year, but
even better,
the most the
non-attributable.
most interesting ones was, I think maybe last year or a couple of years ago, we had our one of our first environmental breaches.
I remember this.
So
Yeah.
there is a category in Veris which is it's almost like act of God, force majeure, right? There was a flood. There was actually one which if I remember correctly, was a tornado that hit a hospital and spread the medical records all around the county.
Oh,
It counts. It counts for HIPAA. It counts. And
oh man.
yeah, yeah. And there was another one which was, I think you can still find this. It was a story about a woman astronaut living on the International Space Station.
Oh, that's
Right?
right. She committed the
But she
first.
hacked, yeah,
Yep.
she hacked, I don't know, maybe I think
I think it was her
ex-partners.
her partner's email while they were getting divorced.
Yes,
He accessed
from
it
the space station.
from the space
From the
station.
space
Yeah.
station. We actually panicked on that one. Oh my God, do we have a country code for that? And we didn't. So
Oh,
we actually have a outside of Earth code
nice.
now for the just in case we're
Well,
future proofing a little bit.
we have a
That's
question
how we
here that
learn.
the
Yeah.
user kind of brought in some stuff around AI, which I'll talk about. But I was just at a conference recently where we had some discussions around someone talking about basically near Earth objects with operating systems and how they're, basically in scope for cyber warfare and how they can be, either used to target, obviously Turla has been bouncing stuff around for a while from a C2 point of view. But
Mhm.
as we continue to expand in space and have things communicating to each other, you're less likely to be doing the commanding from Earth up to orbit. You might very well have things that are automated
Running
and
over
doing
there.
it
Yeah.
while it's up there. So,
Yeah,
imagine one
that's
little
interesting.
Mars rover getting an affection from another Mars rover with a
Oof.
1 minute or 1 hour lag for radio signal and 30 minutes for light or something like that. Which the math there is horribly wrong. So don't come at me,
God,
bros.
that's
Um,
gonna be a very slow terminal.
that'll be yeah. Yeah, I saw that the documentary with Matt Damon. But this is a great question, which maybe we're getting close to the end of time here. APT attack, or not APT, sorry,
AI.
GPT,
Love it.
AI, ChatGPT.
Love.
Obviously, you've already thought about this. Obviously, these attacks are going to, how you classify that. I've had a lot of questions in my role at Splunk of like, oh, how can we detect ChatGPT attacks? I was like, well, you don't really. It's more acting as an augmentation, like other than the speed. It's not really about like, it's not like the DARPA project where they actually had AI hacking AI defense. It's, right now most AI is really about
Yes.
augmenting a person. But I am curious, will you come up with a tag? Will you have any sort of discussion around this, or will it be some really fun, snarky footnotes? The masses
Well,
want to know. LinkedIn user wants to know.
we definitely gonna have the snarky footnotes. That's absolutely no question. But
Done.
the truth is that the most of the attacks that we can imagine today, and maybe imagine is the wrong word, but we can provably demonstrate that are possible. Not like, oh, AI is creating polymorphic malware and it ate my homework, which we get those in the industry all the time. But it's gonna, like you said, it's gonna augment the attackers. So one thing very, very, very likely, let's use AI to augment the creation of phishing emails and
Right.
making phishing emails more believable, right? How much of a dent that's going to have to be gonna have? So first of all, you're likely not gonna detect that on the
Yeah.
back end. You're not gonna know if it came from it, unless it comes like as an AI language model. I actually should not be writing this phishing email,
Right.
and that actually goes out, but you're likely not gonna see it. But then, is that gonna make a dent on? Oh, now we have more phishing because we actually made it easier. Look, bad phishing works fine.
That's been my argument the whole time. It's,
Bad phishing works
if you have
fine. You
if
don't
you have
need
a
to.
gold nugget and you have a piece of dirt on it, and you take a rag and you rub the piece of dirt on it, your gold nugget did not suddenly get 1,000 times more valuable. You just have a less, it's spear phishing already. I mean, according to the Verizon DBIR, huge ingress, right? Or phishing or sending of email, whether that be with malware or pretexting, but an email as an ingress of an incident or a breach is the number one methodology. So if we get spear phishing, are we just going to go, or GPT phishing? Is it going to get better? Maybe, but it's already pretty damn good. So
The same goes for malware, right? Oh, so now very believable scenario, right? You have a malware developer that now has, GitHub Copilot or something like that. It's making him more productive as he writes the malware. Log4j, was it what, a day? A couple of days?
So yeah, this is
okay. Now it's half a day. look, we're fighting against 45 days. Doesn't make a difference.
Yep.
Makes no difference.
I've been saying the same
Right?
thing. It took about 4 days for adversaries to take the first RCEs and Log4j and then come up with new RCEs later on. I now see that happening within 4 hours. But conversely, for a network defender, it would take me hours and hours to write a regex that was going to capture everything. But now with GPT, I can write a regex that'll capture it. So the only one who loses are the people who aren't looking at generative AI at all as an augmentation, whether you're adversary defensive, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. But then we start to go into the more exoteric scenarios, exotic scenarios where, oh no, it's going to find 0 day.
Yeah.
And I don't think we have a good. So I'm not an expert, right? So let me put that. I did some dabbling with machine learning in my years, right? But I'm not a large language model person. Sure. It doesn't seem likely because of the nature of the work that goes into putting those things together, right? And my anecdotal experience talking to people who have done this for a while, right? There are people trying to figure that out, but most of them don't believe that it is possible today, right? It's it can only the current models we have can only pass a test that it already knows about.
Right.
It can only answer a question that it has seen the answer before.
Which,
right?
For me, the example that will be, if you look at Log4j as a good case study, the RCEs that came out afterwards were not novel. They were newer or different versions of the similar methods that were already used for the first RCE. And so that might be a candidate because what you're saying is go find me things that are like this in other places in the code. It's not saying go find new RCEs, remote code exploits or executions. It's just saying, hey, I think this is bad. Go find me things that are mushy like this. Might be.
But here's the thing, right? And if you talk to anybody who is actually using those things in real life today, the first thing they'll tell you, the first lesson you have to do is that you have to tell the language model to do something that's hard to do, but easy to check.
Right.
Because you cannot trust it at face value. You have to be able to, at a glance, figure out if it's correct or not. Otherwise, you're going to go, it took it a second to give you 2 days of research on the internet to figure out it was lying to you. That is the opposite of productivity, right? So I don't think that specific use case that you were describing would fall under the hard to do, easy to check.
Fair enough.
Right? But again, also not a 0 day researcher, right? Maybe it's very easy to tune the fuzzy mechanism to, okay, this looks promising, let's try to do that. Maybe there is a loop here, right? But again, human through and through, right? I don't see us having a 10x improvement on anything here.
It's somebody described to me, LLMs are like very earnest children. They will lie to you with absolute true conviction and then be corrected immediately. Yeah.
They want you to be happy. They want to give you the answer.
That's all the AI wants.
Doesn't matter if it makes sense or not. Yeah.
So fair. Which being happy is a good way to end this session. Thank you, everyone who joined. Alex, thank you as always, and a big congratulations to the team. I do know how much effort goes into this. I hope they know how much everyone appreciates it. It is a big, and in my opinion, the most important report that comes out in the industry for network defenders. I think it helps recenter a lot of people. It should, hopefully, if you've read this, I think we didn't really go into it. One of the big differences this year I saw was some really practical connections using the MITRE ATT&CK and CIS. So if you've ever read this and been like, great, what's the point? I feel like this year the DBIR really went ahead and said, okay, these are areas you should care about if you're worried about this, which I think was fantastic. For those of you watching,
we've been working very hard into making it as actionable as quickly as possible. Right. So the CIS mappings were already there. We've been working on them for a couple of years. The MITRE mappings, we had a new version launch this year, but we already had it previously. But we as we saw more and more people using those existing mappings with that specific focus, as in, oh, okay, I know system intrusion is a pain point for my industry, right? And so the way we talk about system intrusion, and then you go to the specific industry. So you go like financial. Oh, system intrusion is one of the top 3. You definitely should read that chapter. And then on the chapter you have, okay, these are the main attack techniques where those things express themselves, and also the controls you should be looking at from CIS, right? There's no need to reinvent the wheel. I used to joke that when I joined the team, right, every time we went into an industry, there would always be like a section at the end, which would be like 3 recommendations. Like, oh, these are 3 things you should do according to what's happening in your industry. And it always had to be a pun or a joke because we're always saying the same thing over and over and over again. So much energy was spent there where we could be making jokes elsewhere on the report. So we just standardized this part, and you see a more joke heavy places somewhere else.
Sure. Always my favorite part.
For instance, I had a blast writing the virtual currency section. For instance, it was
one of my favorites.
When folks brought to my attention that it was a thing, it went like 25, 50x. Okay, we need to write about this, right?
And that's pre some of the Lazarus reporting of this year, right? With the Binance.
Correct.
So next year will be even higher. Thank you so much, Alex. For those of you watching, we will be back next week for a regular coffee talk, and this will be posted. So, Alex, until I see you again at a conference or San Francisco near soon, farewell and thank you. And everyone have a great afternoon. Take us away.
All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye.